Good morning and happy Sabbath, Covenant Advent Church. And good morning and happy Sabbath to those of you who've joined us online. Welcome to Sabbath School, and I pray that you'll be richly blessed as we worship together this morning. We'll start with our opening hymn, so I'll ask that you kindly turn to hymn number 528. Hymn number 528. A Shelter in the Time of Storm, hymn number 528. Hymn 528. And when it is found, please stand. Hymn number 528. Reverently kneel for our opening prayer. Dear kind Heavenly Father, we thank you for always being the shelter in our time of storm. We thank you, Lord, for how you protect us and you keep us each day. Father, I thank you that you've allowed us to assemble here and online. I pray that you might be with those who are on their way, and I pray that you might rich us blessly this Sabbath morning. In Jesus' name. Our opening scripture will be coming from Daniel 6, verse 4. That will be Daniel chapter 6, verse 4. Daniel chapter 6, verse 4, and I'll read in your hearing. It reads, "Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him." May the Lord add a rich blessing to the reading of his word. So this morning's lesson, we are studying, this quarter again is Daniel, and this week's lesson we're studying about Daniel in the lion's den. And although this is a story that's often used to teach faithfulness to children, there are a lot of very important lessons here for us as adults. And just to set the scene a bit, I'd like to share a reading from Sanctified Life. This is Sanctified Life, page 42. And it reads, "When Darius took possession of the throne of Babylon, he at once proceeded to reorganize the government. He set over the kingdom 120 princes, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first. And Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king thought to set him over the whole realm. The honors bestowed upon Daniel excited the jealousy of the leading men of the kingdom. The presidents and princes sought to find occasion for complaint against him, but they could find none occasion nor fault." What a lesson is here presented for all Christians. The keen eyes of jealousy were fixed upon Daniel day after day. Their watchings were sharpened by hatred, yet not a word or act of his life could they make appear wrong. And still he made no claim to sanctification, but he did find that which was infinitely better. He lived a life of faithfulness and consecration. The more blameless the conduct of Daniel, the greater was the hatred against him by his enemies. They were filled with madness because they could find nothing in his moral character or in the discharge of his duties upon which to base a complaint against him. Then said these men, "We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God." 3 times a day Daniel prayed to the God of heaven. This was the only accusation that could be brought against him. A scheme was now devised to accomplish his destruction. His enemies assembled at the palace and besought the king to pass a decree that no person in the whole realm should ask anything of either God or man except of Darius the king for the space of 30 days, and that any violation of this edict should be punished by casting the offender into the den of lions. The king knew nothing of the hatred of these men toward Daniel, and did not suspect that the decree would in any way injure him. Through flattery, they made the monarch believe it would be greatly to his honor to pass such an edict. With a smile of satanic triumph upon their faces, they came forth from the presence of the king and rejoiced together over this snare which they have laid for the servant of God. So once again, I've set the scene for this morning's lesson. And once again, this is a story more than something or a story to use to teach faith to children, but for us as adults to always keep in mind that as we try to live godly, there will be those who will be jealous and try to set snares for our feet. But we also must remember that this is also a great cosmic conflict, and we're actors on this stage, and we must all act our part. So at this time, I will ask that we kneel once again as we have prayer for the teacher, and then we will go right into our lesson study. Please kneel. Dear kind Father, Lord, we bow before Thee once again, asking You to send Your Holy Spirit to be amongst us. I ask that You might bless the teacher this morning, bless those who will be hearing, both here and online, and I ask that You might help us to truly retain the things that we learned this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. I will now turn the Sabbath school study, or lesson time, over to our teacher this morning, Elder Jose Otero.
Good morning to our Sabbath school lesson number 7, entitled From the Lion's Den to the Angel's Den. Let me turn over to Book of Daniel. The Book of Daniel, specifically this story, well, I would say all the stories, have a parallel to other stories in the Bible. And this story is no different. There are some parallels. to the end of times and also to the experience of Christ and others. Last week we studied about the arrogance of Nebuchadnezzar, and this week this lesson turns to a different king, King Darius, and over again we see that that faithfulness is tested. But the story unfolds as we find in the faithfulness in God's people. It affects other parts of our life. In other words, if we're unfaithful in one section of our life, then we're going to be unfaithful in other realms of life. And our spiritual life is not any different. And we see here that Daniel was persecuted. And he was persecuted not because he did something wrong, but because he had a relationship with God. That's basically the only thing that they had against Daniel. And one thing that is about Daniel that strikes me is that he had a very prayerful, a very worship-like life. And the worship that Daniel did was a proof of God. We know that there's a lot of worship today in this world, but not all Christian religions, so all religions in that matter, has a worship that's a proof of God. But here we have a worship that's a proof of God, and for that Daniel was jealous of among his peers. And we see that in the lesson on Sunday, jealous souls. In Daniel chapter 6, let me go there. In Daniel chapter 6, the first 5 verses are important. So I'm just going to read quickly the first 5 verses. We already read them. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because of an excellent spirit was in him. And the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could not find on occasion or fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of God. And so we know that that's the first table of the law. And that's very interesting. We know that a plot was against Daniel. And the whole base of it is just jealousy, because there was no error found in Daniel. Wouldn't we want somebody in the government today like Daniel? Wouldn't that be nice? But you see, when people are there in this bucket, right, in their crabs, they just want to put everybody down because they want to be first. And jealousy is just one of those emotions, one of those sins that it's, even if you put it under a microscope. Let's say you can't see jealousy, you need a microscope, and you see this a little jealousy the size of of a cell. That's dangerous, even that small. Remember that the coronavirus is very small, but it's doing a lot of damage physically, and this jealousy is the same way. Even a small amount of jealousy in the heart will cause a lot of damage. And just to think that, I believe it was Cain versus Abel, right? All that was that was just because of jealousy. And remember in heaven, jealousy started in heaven When Luther said that he was sent to the Most High. Um, Christ had to go through the same thing. I think this is one of the parallels that I see here is that um, despite the fact that Christ did nothing wrong, Lucifer wanted to pin something on Christ. And he not only wanted to pin something on Christ, but he wanted to ascend and be above Christ. And so this is what we see here in this illustration where there's a plot against Daniel. There's nothing that Daniel did wrong, but yet people who wanted that position, especially I think the presidents, they think about this. Why should this Daniel be in charge? What was he? He wasn't even a Mede or a Persian. He was what? He was a Jew. He was could have been even seen as a slave. He was a captive. But yet he is above everybody in the realm. And one of the things that they might have felt is like, why is the king showing favoritism to Daniel? But the fact of the matter is that the king wasn't showing favoritism to Daniel. If you remember back in Nebuchadnezzar, the empire of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar found Daniel and the three boys, right, 10 times better. So it wasn't favoritism. It was more of Daniel was just the best man for the job. But again, there's a lot of racism, and somebody may say, "Well, he's Jewish. Why is he gonna be over the realm?" Basically, when you're second in command, you're running the kingdom. Because everybody has to answer before they answer to the king. They have to answer to you first, and then the king. Because Daniel was put over the president, so the king would not have no damage. So you can't get to the king unless you go through Daniel. And he was just promoted on that merit. I don't remember Daniel applying for the job. He was chosen. Daniel didn't. Daniel, what did he tell Belshazzar? You can keep it. I don't want none of that. Whatever he was offering. And Daniel could have probably even been happy if he just wasn't called. If he just stayed in the room or wherever he was. They called him. Daniel didn't say, "Oh, let me interpret that for you." So that we see here that sometimes, God's people are put in positions to be a witness for God. And that in itself will raise the jealousy of those that are around because, you see, they want that honor. But Daniel didn't want that. And they plot so they can go to the king and show that there's something negative about Daniel. And the only thing they found is that Daniel does his job so well that there's nothing that we can do. There's nothing that we can pay him on the job. So they have to look outside his work ethics and now go into his personal life, which they had no business in doing. This is Daniel that he's doing outside of work. He's not praying in the king's court. He's going to his own quarters and he's praying to his God. But one of the things also is that, Daniel had a character of humility. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of times when you look at the book of Daniel, people study it in terms of the end times. But what I see here is that a lot of things are happening today. Look at any nation, any empire. You can have a story like Daniel. You can have a story maybe in your own life. It could be a micro of Daniel in your own realm. And one of the things I notice about people who are successful, they are consistent. Whether you're secular, whether you're spiritual. If you want to be successful, you have to be consistent. And consistency is one of the things that I've noticed is that in Daniel, no matter what empire he's in, he is consistent. So if he would have gone to the empire of the Greeks, let's say, for example, he would have lived that long, how would he behave? The same way, because you see a pattern. And so the consistency in Daniel's life, and if Daniel was alive today, he'll be the same. It wouldn't change. It was his character that I think won over the king. Because remember, he's dealing with heathen kings. He's not dealing with kings that are spiritual. Think about Nebuchadnezzar. Can you imagine being with Nebuchadnezzar, a guy like that builds a statue of gold, knowing that his kingdom is not going to last that long, but yet you have to deal with that on a daily basis. And yet Daniel was consistent. And one of the things that I think God is warning us in this lesson is that jealousy is a very disruptive nature in the life. God warns us not to be covetousness in the Ten Commandments. So God puts it in the Ten Commandments up there with murder and what else? Adultery and lying. And so he put covetousness. So if covetousness is what leads to other sins. And there's no bounds. When jealousy is in the heart, you have to be careful with the person who's jealous, because something else will come out of that. Because jealousy is something that will go through any length. Murder and theft, hatred, lying. Jealousy just leads to other sins. And so we have to be careful about jealousy, not only in our own lives, but also others who are jealous. We have to protect ourselves and continue to be faithful to God. Even if we know that person is jealous, we know they're dangerous. But we just have to continually pray and continually do what we always do. And we know in other sections of the Bible, I mentioned Cain and Abel. That's another story which led to unfortunate murder of Abel. But in this story, of course, Daniel is spared. Remember that jealousy started in heaven before the world was created. So it's something that doesn't come from, it's just nothing positive about being jealous. And so we have to be a testimony of being faithful. In Monday's lesson, in Daniel chapter 6 and verse 6 through 9, for the sake of time, I'm rushing a little bit, but we're going to read we'll read the 3 verses, 6 to 9 in Daniel chapter 6. It says, this is concerning the plot against Daniel. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, Can Darius live forever? All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the lion's den. O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it may not change, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which ought not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Boy, I tell you, in order for you to go to the king and say these things, pretty much they knew the king. And for them to know that the king would just say, yeah, I'll do it, without examining, you know how people say, okay, let me think about it. Let me look into that. That there's some prudence in that person. That person is careful. But the king was like, yeah, I'll sign it. In verse 6, you can see the wickedness in the plan. But I don't know. It says there, then these presidents and the princes assembled together to the king and said unto him, King Darius, live forever. And then it says everybody. I don't know if everybody came up with this plan. Can you imagine getting together 120 people and the presidents, and they're going to come up with this plan? I don't know. I kind of get a sense that it was just some of them. Is all of them? Okay, so it was all of them. Pastor says all of them. And and they came together to go against Daniel. And I said to myself, man, what kind of people are in charge? What is this? This is the people in charge that are willing to see a man that has not done nothing wrong, and still they want to take him down. Does his job. He did great work in with the king of Babylon to the end. Interpret the dreams, interpret the writing on the wall, and they still come together to plot. But one thing I find also amazing is like how Daniel handled the situation. Don't you see how Daniel handled the situation? Yes.
Brother Lamb posted, jealousy leads to hatred, which can lead to murder.
Right.
Jealous people plot against you. They may hope for your destruction.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes, when that happens, it's like what comes out of at the end, you know? It's like when you see two kids fighting over something, a toy, and they're pulling back and forth, and then the toy breaks because they're fighting over it, then now nobody wants it. Instead of them just sharing it and playing together. It really leads to nothing. God gives us what we have, and we should just be happy with what we have. And you'd be surprised. 'Cause sometimes I come across a situation where you earn less than somebody else who may be earning a lot more than you. But then I hear something like, "Oh, I'm broke," and you say to yourself, "But don't you earn more than I do? And I have savings, and I eat well." And I lack nothing, and yet you have more, and you're broke, you don't have money, and you don't eat as well as I do, you're not living as well as I do. What is that? Can a person who has more be jealous of a person who has less? I think it's possible. But think about how Daniel reacted. And think about how Daniel behaved. And just remember that Daniel's not a young man at this time. He has to be at least 84 and up. And he's dealing with these individuals, and Daniel's an old-timer, if I should say. And he says, I've dealt with you guys in Babylon, right? Now he's in Medo-Persia. And these guys... Don't think that the guy erased the writing of the wall when the Medes and the Persians came in. They must have gone in and said, "What is that?" And they must have saw. They must have heard. And still, they want to do this. And now Daniel's like, "Okay, I dealt with you guys before in the other kingdom. You guys haven't changed." Yes.
I was gonna say that Daniel was in his teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
So anywhere from probably 16 to 22.
Mm-hmm.
If you just say high school to college. So
Right,
I'm assuming it was his college years. He was 10 times smarter than the best students.
Yeah.
And he kept on
Right.
with his faithfulness diet lifestyle. So I'd hear it could be easily 80 something.
84 at least.
So we don't know what part of the captivity, if it was in the first wave or the second wave, but it was 70 years in Babylon.
Yeah.
So we don't know if he was at the beginning of the 70 years or sometime when the 70 years already had started running out. So you can add to his age, it could be 80 something, 90
Yeah.
something. So you add those years up, and you're competing against somebody like that, who had, I think, his late teens, 20s, 10 times more than the average person. Because he's moral. He's trustworthy, as the text, the lesson was saying, or faithful. And he's a foreigner. You're going to be running against the wall and crashing into the wall, going up against him. Because he has all these different, he has a better diet. He has there's so many things about him that puts him ahead of the average person. you can see how they could be jealous. And what it tells me also is that you have to, if you're at a certain level, you got to know that there's going to be just a lot of people going to hate on you.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts them that you're not, not something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to know in life, that you can have haters and detractors.
Mm-hmm.
But that was part of Daniel's experience. So he didn't do anything wrong. So you could be hated because you are who you are. And people are going to have a hard time because they just can't find something to take you down with, because you're that good, and there's people out there who are that good in multiple areas in their lives. And there's people out there who are that not good in multiple areas in their life, and they're in position of trust.
The spirit of prophecies describe Daniel as a intellectual power. So, I mean, he was from the royal line, the tribe of Judah. So I'm thinking that his training had to come down from Solomon. They say that because the education system was different in Israel, specifically in certain sections of the country, and I think of the people, rather, that's what I meant to say, that they abide by. And so when you go and train different with the Word of God, right, there's going to be wisdom that you're going to be able to know that other people don't know.
He was a student of Jeremiah also.
He was a student of Jeremiah. So, Daniel was 10 times better even before he got to Babylon. Some people say, well, he went to the school, and now they found him 10 times better. No, he went to the school, and he was exposed to, the pagan side of things, but he was 10 times better when he got there. Let's not fool ourselves. The life of a true Christian and the intellect can be high, it can be up there. And the understanding is different also. So to find Daniel 10 times better, we say, wow, but when you compare the apples to apples, we say, oh, wait a minute, that's why. He was trained in the things of God. And so, the plot was what, 30 days? 30 days is not a long time. But this thing was for Daniel. The death decree is for Daniel, basically, right? Because somebody else would have gone in hiding and prayed. They knew that Daniel was going to do what he does, It's like, I don't know how to explain it other than, Daniel was just faithful, and they knew it. Just like they knew the king was going to sign this decree, And people know, they observe you. They know how you behave. They know what you're going to do in certain circumstances, because they've probably seen you before do the same thing in a similar circumstance. So, and the training that Daniel received, that's how I behave in certain circumstances. Just like you receive training in certain parts of society, so you can react in a certain way when the emergency comes. So when the emergency came, Daniel behaved in a certain way, which they can predict. Yes.
Question. Was David jealous of Uriah at one point before he had him killed?
Was David jealous before Uriah? That's the husband of Bathsheba.
Yes.
That's a good question. I never. I think that David was just covetousness, to just want something that he couldn't have. Because David, when he saw Bathsheba, how many wives did he have? 300. Well, 300 with the concubines, right? So yeah. Because Solomon, got 1,000 wives, right? But Solomon got that from David. So David, he was married. Even before he became king, he had like how many wives? Like maybe 2, right? So there was a pattern already set. But by the time Bathsheba came along, David was along, he was older. And he had multiple wives. Was he jealous of Uriah? Uriah was a Hittite. So there's some similarities in the fact that, Uriah was faithful despite the fact that he wasn't a Jew. He was a Hittite. So they also have similarities. Is it possible? It could have been possible, but Uriah was what? One of the mighty men? It could be possible that he could have been jealous. But I think it's, I don't know. Is covetous jealousy the same? Wanting something that, somebody else?
Well, they haven't. So you're jealous that they haven't.
Probably, yeah. Bathsheba could have been the most beautiful out of all his wives, right? So it could have been jealousy, But I don't know. It's possible. I do know that David was covetousness because he wanted that woman, which he did not need to have, and he paid the price for it. But I don't know. The question to that is like, I think it was just covetousness. Was he jealous? Probably. It's possible. Because right now we have a situation where you have billionaires that have the key to the world because of the money they have, and they still want to be president.
I'm getting your 8 wives.
8 wives? Yeah. Yeah, so even with 8 wives, why would you want one more? Then it's like, I don't know.
There's none like her.
That's none like her. Oh, covetousness, right? I don't know. Some people would say if I was a billionaire, I would look down on the position of the president. But the thing is that the president, receives a lot of backs, is way up there. Yeah. A president is above a billionaire? You make laws? So I don't know. I don't want to be president. I don't even want to be a billionaire. But this is a difficult situation because you have people who are poor and say, man, if I just had that, I would do good. But then people who have it, that can do good, don't do good. So it's like right now you have a situation where the people who plotted against Daniel, they were not like saying, oh, I'm going to do good. No, they wanted to plot so they can get that position for their own selves. Yeah.
I would say, though, part of that is he's put there for one purpose, it says, or one of the purposes put there for.
Daniel?
Yes,
Okay.
so that the king does not suffer loss.
Right.
So who was he going to suffer loss from?
Oh, okay.
The same people plotting against Daniel.
Yeah.
So there's a point where there will be people who will try to get rid of you, so that when you're removed, they can do what they want to do.
They can apply the law to their advantage.
Right? They can get the money that they want to get.
Right.
The king gonna suffer loss.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody who's saying, why is this happening? And pressing for the Constitution to be upheld, blah, 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 then they say, well, we know what happened. This guy is blocking us. Get rid of this guy. Get rid of this guy. They can hear me. Get rid of this guy, and then we'll be able to free to steal what we want to steal.
Is the mic on?
Yeah, they can hear me.
They can. Okay. So what was the last part?
They can steal what they want to steal.
They can steal what they want to steal. Yeah. Because remember, this was, 120? But by the time Esther was like 127. So the kingdom was growing in power. It was going to grow in power. It was just powerful to begin with. Just think about it. You overtook the most powerful kingdom in the world. So you're strong as it is, but now you took over the most powerful kingdom. Think about all that power, and it's going to grow, and wealth, and So this is the empire that basically sent the decree out to rebuild Jerusalem, and they basically let sections of the kingdom worship as they wanted to worship. So they were really powerful as a kingdom. Where was I? So the plot of against Daniel, one of the points I wanted to make was that Daniel knew how to handle people who were jealous, people who were covetousness. Daniel already knew. He's seen this before in Babylon. He experienced it hands-on with the king and all the others. So by the time he got to Medo Persia, Daniel was already, he was already established as with a good character and with a godly character, and he knew how to handle those people. And I did want to make another point. Why didn't Daniel just pray in secret though? That was an option. The Bible doesn't say anything against secret prayer. But why did he pray? In the window, like for everybody to see, knowing that the death decree was about to happen. Because you understand, there's nothing wrong with secret prayer, but Daniel did what and he also knew that he must have known that this decree is for him. Because who else is praying to the true God besides Daniel? Could have been somebody else, but
there were other Jews in the nation
Right.
at that point in time,
right.
but they knew the consistency of Daniel. It wasn't like they just came up with this idea right away. I mean, it's like it says that they plotted. They plotted against Daniel. So normally it's very similar to what they did to Christ. That they knew, like when Judas took the people to arrest him, he took them to where Christ would always frequent. They knew that he was going to be there praying.
In the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, so he took him there because he knew the pattern. And the same thing, these 120 that plotted together to get that decree, they knew the pattern of Daniel. And that's why they said the only way that we're going to get him is if we do something concerning the law of his God. So it wasn't like, like we said, there had to be other people. And the other people probably did, pray like wherever it was that they prayed. But it didn't matter to them because who they were after was Daniel. And the only way to be able to, it's like, for example, like if you every morning, you get up and you have a certain ritual and you take, you park in the same place every single time. And somebody that is studying that pattern, it's just like, okay, I know where to catch this person. And it's the same thing that they did with Daniel. They knew his pattern and they knew the way he prayed. It wasn't like a one-time occasion. So they specifically wrote the law so that it could be against Daniel. And so I think that's the reason why. And so Daniel was like, I believe the spirit of prophecy makes it clear that he wasn't going to change his pattern for man, but he was going to do as he always did.
But your point is that he prayed openly because he was against what they were doing. He knew he's had a relationship with God, right? And for me, he prayed out in the open, not in the open, I mean out, but he was, he was seen. He prayed so people can see. And I don't think he wanted to limit God, Like he could have just gone and hide for 30 days. But he didn't want to limit for God. I think he knew how God worked, and he knew that God can deliver because he has delivered before. The fiery furnace, right? The dream. So he knew God was walking with him. He did not want to, I think, limit God. I think he didn't know what was going to happen, but he wanted to be faithful. Yes.
Brother Lamb posted, I think they knew Daniel was always going to be loyal to God, and they just used his loyalty to God as a snare to find a reason to remove him.
Yeah, yeah. That's the first table of the law, which is our relationship to God. And isn't that something? You know, you have the greatest position in the world, which was the king, and then you had the princes. Some of them could have been billionaires. But who's the center of the story? It's Daniel. Daniel, who didn't want the riches, who just, he was a captive. He was. I don't even think he wanted to be, in a position of leadership with the Medes and Persians. He just was willing to go wherever God put him, and serve wherever he was being put to serve. But yet, there's a focus on Daniel, not on everything else. So I find that interesting. And in Tuesday's lesson, I think it's one of the reasons why some say that Daniel is in the Bible. It says here, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in the chamber toward Jerusalem, he knelt upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. So Daniel's always prayed 3 times, every other day. But there's something about that particular day that he prayed that he knew it was different, It's just like certain things that happen over and over again. But one day, it seems like it's different. When Christ will go to Gethsemane and pray, he would do this often. But the night he was arrested, that night was something different. And so I think now I get a sense that Daniel prayed 3 times. It's just different than other times because there was something at stake. We see a story between individuals. They want power and there's injustice, and we see that. But there's another underlying issue, and this is the great controversy. There's principles that are, that are at stake here, and sometimes. You know what it is where injustice happens and you say, no, I'm going to stick to principle, It's like if you buy something and they cheated you, and yet, remember you had some problem with that, and even if you have to pay for the shipping, you send it back to them out of principle, right. You know?
You do it because you're going to,
That's not right. And even if I have to pay $5 in shipping, I'm going to send it back to you and you're going to take it back, You do it out of principle, and I think Daniel was doing what he normally did, but I think he was doing this because he knew that the stakes were high, and if he would just compromise this time, then it'll be different. Like before, he can go in and not be out the window. He could go out and pray in secret. It wouldn't matter because there was nothing at stake. But when there's something at stake, will we come to church? You understand? Will we still behave the way we normally behave, when there was nothing at stake? You see, when there's something at stake, that's when we cannot change the pattern. That's when we cannot go in secret. That's when we have to stand up, you see? And compromise is a funny thing because it can be used, right, to serve certain purposes. And I think that here it's a very interesting when Daniel could have gone and prayed in secret, he didn't. He said, no, I know about the furnace. I know about Nebuchadnezzar eating grass. I know about these things. No, I'm going to pray out the window 3 times, And Daniel allowed, for things to take place. He was like, well, I'm going to let God... I'm going to let God be God, because he's been God before. He's taken care of me. So now something is at stake. Oh, I'm scared. They're going to put me in the lion's den. Now, I'm going to be behaving different, and this is it's a tough thing. I remember Same thing with Daniel, you know. They told them, no, they're not going to give you no Sabbath off. And I was like, no, that's not true, you know. Because I understand that God will open the windows if you're faithful, right? And I understand that, no, you working on Saturdays, it's a policy made by man. And those policies, you know, they could be worked out, yes.
Yeah, I would say when you think about that, again, he was there because the kingdom shouldn't suffer loss.
Okay.
So if you get rid of Daniel, then the kingdom is going to suffer loss. And it's the same thing you can apply to any other scenario like that. If they won, that could literally be the end of Medes and Persia as a kingdom. Because now you have all these losers running the kingdom. And they're going to run it to the ground. Because who's going to stop them from making the king suffer loss, which is ultimately the kingdom, right? That was what Daniel was put there for. And so that's where the problem is, where you have everybody, or a bunch of people, the majority, try to persecute the righteous. But if they persecute the righteous, they want to get rid of what? Righteousness.
Right.
And that's going to cause loss. And you see this in societies all the time. You run out somebody that is good out of the society or to the church, there's going to be a moral fall. And that moral fall could spell the doom of a church. How many churches are closed now? That what the problem was, there was people there that was speaking out against right, or speaking against wrong. And they run them out, and then what happened to church? Just take a dive. Because there's no voice of reason.
Like the church goes on, but it's just not the same.
No, it doesn't. It slowly disintegrates.
It's a painful thing to watch, yes.
Yeah, it's slowly disintegrate, because what happened is, like, everybody becomes, because think about these guys, if that was their plot, who would tell they wouldn't go after the king next?
Who what? I missed that, I'm sorry.
Who would tell if they wouldn't go after the king next?
Sure. And listen, that kingdom was running before without Daniel. And so there must have been a change that the king wanted. There had to be something, because they were all qualified to run the kingdom. There were princes and there were presidents. But here we have a situation where the king is saying, I want this guy. You see, can you imagine what a witness? This is a testimony on Daniel's part, that he was able to be a witness for God in such a manner that the king, a heathen king, said, I want you to be on my right side. And can you imagine if there was somebody in the government today, in the Trump administration, that can be such a witness that Trump would say, I want this guy to be a witness. I want him to be, so I won't suffer loss. Can you imagine what a difference the government would be if there was a faithful Christian in that staff and that administration? Now, I'm not saying that Seventh-day Adventists should run for office, but I'm just saying that there is someone who's faithful in that administration. It will make such an impact that, think about it, when the king allowed Daniel to go in, because he had to, the laws couldn't change. And he put that seal. The next morning he ran to that. He couldn't, he fasted, there was no music, right? On his mind was just Daniel. Think about the impact that Daniel made. There's nobody in this administration right now, in this government, that's like a Daniel, yes.
Yeah, good point. I think if you look at the story again, remember when Babylon fell, Daniel was actually in Medes and Persia. He was actually in the capital, in the citadel. So he was Shushan, the palace. So he was already there before Babylon fell. So again, we don't know. I remember he was running Babylon, so to speak. So we don't know how he influenced the Medes and the Persians, because he's there as pre-Babylonian fall.
Right.
And now Nebuchadnezzar, the Darius says, I want you to lead. So they had to know him, know his style of leadership. From before. So,
sure.
Because you're saying how they picked him. Well, remember, they knew him. He was already in their province. He already knew them. He was already making his remember, when they called him from the Medes and the Persians. So he was already there, and he left them to say, oh, those guys that I was hanging out with,
Right.
before or teaching them or
Right.
instructing them, they're going to take over. So that's the so this was not like what you would say a coincidence. This is very methodically worked out by God, that He would be like, who's next? Because He had the dream already. Remember, He knew what the dream meant, and so He knew the dream meant. That He said, "Oh, these guys are next. I'm over there with them, and I'm over there with them. Must be instructing them." So when it was time, boom, He's there.
Yeah, he knew the prophecy.
So they had to know the prophecy and know what is this going on? Why are they going against him? Just like with Belteshazzar. Remember Belteshazzar? He says, "You knew what your father knew. You knew better." And I think it's the same thing. Daniel was known by the Medes and the Persians before they became most powerful, and they were part of the Babylonian realm. So it would be logical for them to know, okay, this is how Babylon run. This is how we run it.
I think I'm out of time. Yes.
But I think what happens is that you have to see that they were, how, of course, the jealousy would be, would come about when you have 120 chosen people that are coming with you,
Yeah.
you know, that they have been part of your governorship, you know, and you take these 120 people and they're coming now, and they're gonna rule over the provinces, and then you have somebody that is outside of that circle, and you say, well, I want that person on top of all of you. So it could, incite a jealousy, because it's like, wait a second, we were with you, and you putting somebody else that is a foreigner.
We work
'Cause
overtime.
They say, like, it says that that Jew, right? They call him a captive, and so
Yeah.
they say that person,
Yeah.
it's being put over us. It's like, one of the captives, and we are, how is it? We are the Americans, for example.
Would that be racism?
I mean, it's like, it's like we're the ones.
I'm just
We're the natives,
asking a question.
and you're putting a foreigner on top of us.
Yeah,
So-
Anyway, let me just stop. I hear the voice of Prudence.
So I would like to say, though, I've often wondered why they don't run countries like this, right? Where you see, say I'm over here, and I heard there's a good person that is good, say, with healthcare,
Right.
and they're from
That's the same question.
right, and they're from, say, I'm gonna pick a country, say India.
You and a million other people. Okay, go ahead.
And they're from India,
Right.
and they do some massive things over there that increase the health. And I'm over here, and I'm in whatever country.
Right.
And I say, hey, look, could you come over here and become our minister of health?
Because of why? Because I don't want the king to suffer.
I don't want the kingdom to suffer loss. And so I'm just going to go out there just like a corporation would do. Because I think that's why corporations do so well. And people praise capitalism. I think they understand it's not capitalism. It's a mere fact that it's capitalism in the sense of we're here to make money.
We're here to make money,
So
or a
if-
favor too, a favor.
Well, if we have to go and bring in techs to design or whatever from whatever country, and we heard there's this guy over here is a genius, and he's we're gonna just import him, give him a visa, give him legal document, and say you're now conferred a citizenship, make us make money.
But they did that when they built the atomic bomb.
Yes, it was all these German.
But that was for the war and for destruction.
Well, it's again, but you say who is the best at rocketry, and you said the Germans are. So you go get the Germans,
They had the rockets.
right? So that's to me how you do life. You just say because you see if you see what now Korea is doing, they're bringing in all these BMW engineers to build their electric cars.
Right.
They didn't use primarily Korean engineers. They brought in Germans again,
Right.
because they're good at engineering, and BMW had basically stumbled with electric cars. So they said, we'll take you guys, and we'll pay you. But normally government, they said, no, you have to be a citizen because you have to be faithful to the country. And so you could have a person who is the head of defense or the head of the attorney general. Well, there could be a better attorney general from another country. But you wouldn't say, oh, this is the best legal man in the world, bring him to our country.
Right.
But you would say, no, he has to be a citizen to get that job. This is a conferred citizenship on him.
Right.
But we don't do it like that. So you could have a person who's excellent in another country, but you wouldn't do it in government. But I think that's what Darius did. Just say, hey, look, Daniel is the best guy. That we search the world, and he's better. He was the best in Babylon. We take him.
Sure.
And then the governors be like, no, we have a problem with that because you bring this guy, but he's just the best.
Sure. I mean, you know, when a kingdom suffers loss, the who's going to get their head cut off if the kingdom is taken over? You know, it's either like you have a guy like Daniel, or the other option is to have your finger on a button with a nuclear weapon. You know, what you said? You know? Oh, okay. You know, it's either because you know what America does. They take over countries and they hang the leader. Or if not, they let the people kill the leader. You know, so
But that's a mistake again.
yeah, well, you don't have a Daniel. You choose
That's a mistake.
you choose other ways.
Everybody.
Huh?
You don't kill everybody.
No, you don't kill everybody. That's okay. Where we at? Tuesday? Man, how time goes by. And the lions then, in Daniel chapter 6, we can't read everything for the sake of time. Let me read 6:16. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God whom thou servest continually, what he says? He was so sure, right? He would deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. So here we have a language that the king is speaking. And a couple of things I'm thinking about. First is the law. You know, the law cannot be changed. Why is it that in the Bible we have this illustration of the law not changing, and there's other laws that don't change, other things, but yet like Herod, right? He says, "Oh, I got to cut off John's head because this is what I have to stand by." But the law of God can be changed. That don't make sense. You know how Christians preach that the law was changed? But here we have situations where, hey, listen, there's this decree that cannot be changed. And so that's one thing. And the next thing is about the faith of the king. He said that the God you serve will save you, right? So he's speaking like, I know that God will save you. But what does he do when he goes home? He's fasting. I don't even think he slept. So it's like, God is going to save, but yet there's something that I need to do. So if he was fasting, nobody in the palace was eating. That's the way it worked, right? When the king was happy, everybody's happy. But when the king was fasting, then everybody fasted. I think that's also happened with Esther. All her servants, right, were fasting. But there was something significant also with the signet. There was a stone. It sort of reminds me of when Christ died. There was a stone place. And, of course, they had guards. But he made sure that there was a seal to make sure that nobody could come and rescue him. And I said to myself, wow, these guys, they must have been doing the happy dance, Oh, we got rid of him. It's like, yes. They must have even been planning ahead. And God made the situation happen so that way he can show that he is the true and one God. You were going to have a comment?
I wanted to say that, I know that last week we saw that Pilate was also, when he saw that it was Christ, and he did whatever he could to try to deliver Christ.
Uh-huh. Right.
Pilate, last week's sermon, right?
The sermon, yes, yes,
and
yes.
and he did whatever he could to try to deliver Christ.
Right.
But one of the things that lacked with Pilate was that he never confessed the power of God, as opposed to
Right now you
Darius.
see Darius speaking these things.
That you see that it says here that Darius did whatever he could to try to deliver Daniel,
Yes.
but to the going down of the sun, and then finally, but he says, "I know that God will deliver you,"
Right.
which is a big difference, because I think that there's a lot of times that people sort of like they are a little bit hesitant about God, and that's and when you have somebody that is a powerful man confessing and saying, "I know that God will be able to deliver you," it bears testimony to the person, as well as to also give the ability to Daniel to reinforce Daniel's beliefs. That it's like, I know that whoever it is that you're serving, that's the person that that God you're serving is the powerful. It's a powerful God. So I mean, it's like it gives Daniel a surety in what he's doing, and he's like, I know he will be able to deliver you. And I think that that's what happens, that when we in our lives are faithful in everything that we do, regardless of what it is that we're doing, we're bearing testimony unbeknownst to us, and other people will be able to say, like, I know that you're God, or I know the beliefs that you have, that they are true because I see it in you. You see, but then again, it's like the person has the ability to either acknowledge that what you're doing is right, or to be able to just turn away from it. And this is the difference that we see with Darius. That Darius accepted and believed in the God that Daniel served, and said, that God that you're serving, I know he can deliver you. And this is the testimony that each one of us has to bear to, so that others will be able to make that acknowledgement.
And when things are at stake, we remember when the king is saying these words, he's hearing the roar of the lion. And so when you have a pride of lion, there can be 12 to 14 lions. If you've seen a lion in the zoo, you see how big these animals can be and how powerful. When they roar, it's like woohoo. You get a sense like, let me just stand back. Just from the roar, and they're laying down, they're roaring, it's so powerful. And he's saying these words. And so in the New Testament, we do have these examples of faithfulness. Like, for example, the centurion soldier, when he tells Christ, no, don't come to my house, just say the word. You see? He knew. He had faith, because he's in a position where other people are following his orders. And he has faith in his servants. When he says go, he goes, right? And remember back in the beginning of the chapter, what does it say about King Darius, about Daniel? It says that it pleases Darius, right, to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. So it pleases him. So there's a reason why it pleased him. And then we read on, we say, oh, the God that you serve. So it is because of the God that Daniel was serving is why Darius was pleased, right? Because if Daniel didn't serve God, would it please Darius? No, he'll be just like the other 120, princes. And so Darius didn't know what was going to happen. Daniel didn't know what was going to happen, but they continued to be faithful, just like they have been in other times. And so what we're going through now is basically a training to be faithful in the little things. So now the big test came with the Lions Den. You see, Daniel's already 84. I think it was still, nonetheless, a position that he had to go through, to be tested. Because after the Lions Den, then what happens? They took him out, right? And then what happened to the people who conspire, who plotted? They went in. Sometimes when people, I tell Daniel the story all the time. When people are digging a pit for you, sometimes they end up falling in that pit. And we have to be careful of jealousy, because jealousy is basically it grows, and you're a Christian and you dig in a pit for somebody. That's not the right thing. And so, huh? Oh yeah. But not only him, they got burnt up, and not only him, but also his children and his wives. And somebody would say, but why? What did the kids do? What did the wives do? And so, this I hear this, little going back and forth, because we're not supposed to suffer for the sins of the fathers. But I think there's an example of Achan, that the Achan and his family, and it's because they were conspiring too. And sometimes, those princes have a lot of power, and who's benefiting? The families. And these kids, they'll talk. And so these kids might have not been 5 or 6. They could have been 40, 50, because these guys were older. And so they might have all been conspiring against Daniel. So they all suffer the punishment. And so when we see wrong being committed, we cannot partake, because we can also become thrown in the lion's den. So we always have to stand up to right. We're going to be tested, and we don't know what's going to happen at the end, how God would deliver. And the Hebrew boy says, even if he doesn't, we still will be faithful. Remember, John the Baptist got his head cut off, right? And so we can't look at life in the microcosm, Sometimes we have to look in totality as to how powerful God is, and God is able to reconcile no matter what happens. And this is the faith that I think the story of Daniel is teaching us, that we have to be faithful, and we have to know that whatever happens, God is going to deliver us, because evil will never win over good. Good is going to win over evil. So no matter what happens, God is able to reconcile and give us our life back. If by any chance something shall happen to us. But I thank you so much for joining us. Sabbath School, I'm way over my time. I'll turn it over at this time to Sister Tamara.
Thank you, Elder Jose, for teaching the lesson, and thank you to those here and online for your attention and participation. I'm going to cut the closing reading I had very short. I'm just simply going to preface it by saying, once again, this week we studied Daniel in the Lion's Den, and we went over the themes of what happens with jealousy and how that leads to other sins. And we also, the lesson alluded to it, that there's a great cosmic conflict that's going on, and that God had allowed Daniel to go into the lion's den so that he could demonstrate to everyone his power and his authority. And it's that idea that I'll end with, because since we are in this great cosmic conflict, we too will likely be called upon to be used by God in this way. Some people he may save, some people he may allow to die, but the fact still remains that if we're calling ourselves Christians and we're calling ourselves followers of God, we have to be faithful in both situations. Just like the 3 Hebrew boys who told King Nebuchadnezzar that our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we still aren't going to bow to your idol. So the closing reading is from Our High Calling, page 357. And again, I'm just going to cut this very short and read the final paragraph, which says, or reads rather, "We may know that if our life is hid with Christ in God, when we are brought into trial because of our faith, Jesus will be with us. When we are brought before rulers and dignitaries to answer for our faith, the Spirit of the Lord will illuminate our understanding, and we shall be able to bear a testimony to the glory of God. And if we are called to suffer for Christ's sake, we shall be able to go to prison trusting in him as a child trusts in his parents. Now is the time to cultivate faith in God. We'll turn to our closing hymn, which will be hymn number 508. Hymn number 508. And when it is found, I'll ask that you kindly stand. Hymn number 508. For our closing prayer. Dear Father, as we end this morning's lesson, I thank you for being amongst us. I thank you, Lord, for the themes that we've studied this morning. And I pray, Lord, that all of us here and those listening and watching online, that we may truly, Lord, live each day being faithful in the small things so that when greater tests come, we'll be able to overcome. And I pray, Lord, that you will help us to truly place our faith in thee, that as we sung Anywhere with Jesus, we will have faith and believe, Lord, that we can safely go. I ask that you might continue to be with us through the remaining Sabbath hours. In Jesus' name, amen. We will have a short break and reconvene at 11:40. 11:40. You are dismissed from Sabbath.